In 2020, Democrats surveyed the entire field of potential candidates, and James Clyburn and the DNC leaders said, Joe Biden is the horse we want to ride to beat Donald Trump. And if you remember, voters had actually rejected Joe Biden to that point. He came in, I believe, fourth in Iowa. Adam looked this up because I might reverse it. I think he came in fourth in Iowa and fifth in New Hampshire. It might be fifth in Iowa and fourth in New Hampshire. Either way, the voters in America who knew Joe Biden the best in 2020, based on the time that he had spent there in Iowa and in New Hampshire, overwhelmingly rejected him. And then we got the South Carolina primary, and there was a panic setting in that Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee, and he was going to be the person running against Donald Trump. And the power brokers in the Democrat Party said, we're not going to allow this. And at that point in time, James Clyburn, South Carolina Democrats, they made the decision Joe Biden's going to be the nominee. And when they made Joe Biden the nominee, that was a calculated choice to try to pick the candidate that they thought would do the best head-to-head against Donald Trump. And guess what? And I said it at the time. I think Biden was the best of the candidates that they could have picked to run against Trump. Here's the problem with them now trying to do the same thing to remove Biden and elevate Kamala to run against Trump. I don't think Kamala Harris would be the nominee if Joe Biden had made the right choice and decided in the late spring, early summer of 2023 that he wasn't going to run for re-election. I don't think Kamala Harris would have beaten out Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker, Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer, whoever the candidates would have been that would have run to be the standard bearer in 2024. I don't think Kamala Harris would have won. Somebody say, okay, what do you base that opinion on, Clay? Well, I base it on the fact that Democrats overwhelmingly rejected her campaign for the 2020 nomination. She dropped out before a single vote had taken place. They did not find her likable. They did not find her politics particularly palatable, and they overwhelmingly rejected her. She had all sorts of staff-related issues. Again, this is not some revolutionary analysis from me. This is what actually happened when she ran in 2020. And then she got elevated as a DEI candidate in 2024. Now, this is important, and this is really important. Joe Biden stunk in Iowa, stunk in New Hampshire, fails in both of those, doesn't come in the top three in either of those states, and then they elevate him in South Carolina, okay? Fails in Iowa, fails in New Hampshire. First two primary states where you spend the most possible time with everybody. Then they decide he's the nominee. They elevate him. And when he was in South Carolina, Joe Biden said that he was going to pick a black woman to put on the Supreme Court. And a little bit later after that, if I remember correctly, he said he was going to pick a woman as his vice presidential running mate. Now, let me talk about why that's actually an insult to whomever you pick. And I've talked about this before. Joe Biden didn't have to do that. Joe Biden could have said, I'm going to pick the best possible vice president, the person that I believe is most ready to be president if something should happen to me, and I'm going to pick the best possible nominee to sit on the Supreme Court, the person that I believe will do the best job to fill that vacancy. Could have said both those things. And he still could have picked Kamala Harris as vice president, and he still could have picked Ketanji Brown Jackson as his Supreme Court nominee. Still could have made both those picks without undercutting their legitimacy by announcing that he was going to make DEI hires beforehand. I'm surprised more people don't talk about this. When Joe Biden said, I'm only going to pick a woman as vice president, he eliminated half of the population. And by its default, he is acknowledging that he wasn't picking overall necessarily the best person. He was picking who he thought was the best woman. When he said, I'm only going to pick a black woman to put on the Supreme Court, he was automatically eliminating 94% of the American population from consideration for that job. He actually undercut Kamala Harris and Ketanji Brown Jackson when he made that choice. DEI delegitimizes people who otherwise might be legitimate picks because Joe Biden said, I'm picking them based on their gender and based on their race and gender. It's actually an insult. What they're now trying to say is, CNN had some guy on who said DEI is the new N-word. I don't even know what that means. You can't select someone based on their diversity, equity, and inclusion points. Specifically tell us that you're doing it, as Joe Biden did with Kamala Harris and Ketanji Brown Jackson, and then say, and you cannot criticize their hire based on DEI policies. You can't tell us you're doing it for DEI and then get mad when we point out that you did it for DEI. Moreover, if DEI is so great, why not just say, yeah, I picked them because of DEI, they're phenomenal. The reason why it's considered to be an attack is because it is. When you limit your selection to a specific group of people and don't pick the best man or woman for a job, you are by definition turning your back on the meritocracy. That's why I love sports in theory. Because the best man or best woman wins, not, by the way, the best man pretending to be a woman, which is what Democrats believe. Sports about the best man or best woman winning. It doesn't matter who your daddy was. It doesn't matter where you went to high school. Everybody's equal when it comes to competition in sports. We don't seek equity. Nobody out there is like, you know what I want to do? I want to compete in a league where everybody's the exact same. That would be a disaster. Hey, we want to have a race where everybody crosses the finish line at the exact same time. And if somebody else is slower, we want to bring them forward so that we can make sure they finish at the same time. That's the exact opposition of the meritocracy of capitalism itself, which is what this nation has been founded upon, and why the world as a whole has seen massive increases in overall quality of life. Because if you unlock the individual ability of every single individual, there are going to be incredible accomplishments. I believe in individuals, not groups. Okay? Kamala Harris dodged scrutiny not only as a DEI hire, but for three big reasons. 2020 was an election that Democrats successfully made about Donald Trump. People didn't vote for Joe Biden. They voted against Donald Trump. So Trump was the number one story of 2020. The number two story of 2020 was COVID. Both of those stories dominated the 2020 electoral cycle. That's how the weekend at Bernie's presidency came to be. They hid Joe Biden in his basement and managed to convince America that Joe Biden would return normalcy to the White House, that he was the adult in charge, that he would be a unique voice for the salvation of America's soul. That's what they tried to sell. And a lot of people bought that idea. That's how Joe Biden won. He was the anti-Trump, and COVID happened. Without COVID, I think Joe Biden would have lost to Donald Trump pretty significantly because everything else was going well. I think the Democrat gambit would have failed, but because of COVID, it ended up working. Okay? Now, what about Kamala Harris? Nobody scrutinized her. Nobody paid attention to her record in California. Nobody went back over her outlandish questioning of Brett Kavanaugh. Nobody pointed out that she actually has not been very accomplished in her career and that the things she has done are incredibly left-wing. She slid in the shadows behind Trump and behind COVID, and she also had the armor, this is the third thing, to protect her of BLM. There were a lot of people out there that were afraid to attack Kamala Harris because they were afraid in the media that they would end up being targets because of the ascendancy of BLM in the summer of 2020. As a result, I think Democrats are in trouble here because Kamala's actual record hasn't been scrutinized. She is, in fact, the border czar. I shared video of Joe Biden appointing her to take command of the border. Oh, by the way, 10 million illegals have crossed. She failed there. She is a steward of Joe Biden's economic policies, which led to the highest inflation in 2 generations. She wanted to defund the police. Unlike Joe Biden, who, to his credit, managed to avoid arguing to defund the police, which I believe is the single dumbest argument advanced by any politician in the 21st century. Indefensible policy that everybody has turned their backs on now. Kamala said we need to defund the police. She also put forward fundraising to bail out the BLM protesters who were burning down the country. Kind of significant. She said she supports the Green New Deal of AOC that would potentially entail 70 to 80% tax rates. She said she doesn't believe that you guys should be able to buy the guns that you want to buy. And she doesn't believe that you guys should be able to buy the cars that you want to buy because she wants EV mandates. This is radical. She is a California left-wing radical. If you're a moderate voter, Trump is far more moderate than Kamala Harris would be. And that's why you're seeing all of the left-wing media suddenly line up and say, well, she wasn't the border czar. Axios went back and changed the phrasing of their stories because they're saying she never had the title border czar. I don't know what official title you want to give her. When Joe Biden says you're going to be in charge of helming up the administration's efforts on the border, chief, leader, he said, I want you to know that this is coming from me, that she is speaking on behalf of the administration and she is taking on this responsibility into others. There's a lot of dishonesty out there because what Democrats are slowly starting to realize is she wouldn't have been a good choice if they had actually done this in an intelligent fashion. They are scrambling, and their own identity politics calculus did not allow them to be able to skip over the black woman who is in second place when the person in first place steps down. So they're being hoisted up on their own identity politics failures, and Kamala Harris is their DEI hire who is now ascending to the role of CEO of the party. Problem is, she hasn't actually accomplished anything, and what she stands for is overwhelmingly rejected by the American public. This is a big problem. And I think over the next 100 days, as Americans become more aware of what Kamala Harris represents, they're going to dislike her even more. And I think you're going to start to see a panic set in associated with this because Kamala has dodged scrutiny and she is going to get eviscerated as all of this begins to get revealed.